Yeah, we're live. 7:01. Almost got it right on the dot. Tonight we're going to be talking about a couple of videos I'm working on, and they should go up very, very soon here. And also, if you take a look at the thumbnail that I did for this video, you can see that it was a Honda B series. In this case, it was in a Del Sol that I owned. It was a road race Del Sol that I used to race in the Motorola Cup that I bought from the team that I drove for. And then I ended up doing a lot of stuff with it in addition to other forms of racing. We ran in US touring car, and that car actually, we won the championship with that car. But also, as you see it there, we didn't ever run it with forced induction in US touring car because they were very strict about the rules that they had. So we had to have a stock B16, which we did, obviously. We had a stock according to the rules ish B16. But what I also used that car for, and a number of motors, because we would go get our race motors from, we would go buy the JDM motors, and we would use those, and then we would, keep them in stock because that's what the rules said. But the other thing that I would do is, as you saw here in this video or in this photo, that I did a bunch of testing using that car because we could do a bunch of testing on the chassis dyno. In this case, the test was run at Westech Performance, and it was part of a series that I did using that car and that motor and different forms of forced induction. So we ran that motor, or that B16, with a Jackson Racing Roots supercharger, a little Eaton. I'm thinking that was either an M45 or an M62. I'm hoping that it was a 62 because that motor would need an M62. And then we also ran it with a single Turbonetics turbo, a small kit they had for the B series, with an front mounted air intercooler on it. The Jackson Racing one had no intercooler on it, which was one of the limitations of that setup. And we'll talk about another limitation as well. The other one, as we see in the photo, no punk, thank you very much. As you see in the photo there, in the thumbnail photo, is the B16 with a Vortex centrifugal supercharger, and you can see that it had the jack shaft going across it, so it drive it off of the assembly of the front of the motor where the balancer and stuff is, and then they would run that power through a jack shaft, and they would mount the blower on the other side, and then the air would come out of the discharge of the blower into the air to water intercooler, and then into the throttle body and intake manifold on the B16. If you look very closely in the photo, you'll notice the hose going to the intercooler was just a garden hose, because what we did was at Westech, rather than run or configure the car with a dedicated system and a pump and all that, what we did was just go hook up a hose to the faucet, basically right outside where the chassis dyno was. And so I just went and bought a hose, cut the end of it off, put it on the barb fitting that went into that air to water aftercooler deal, or intercooler the Vortex sold with that kit. And then we ran another hose out and just drained it, and we weren't running it all the time, but it was very, it made for, we had basically an unlimited water source. So it worked out very well for that kind of testing on the chassis dyno because it was close and convenient. But the question is, for tonight, given that kind of motor, it doesn't have to be a Honda B series. The B series is awesome, as is the K series and a lot of other motors. But on a small displacement, relatively high RPM motor, that was an 8,000 RPM motor. We used to run them higher than that. But on a small displacement, high RPM motor, what form of boost would you take? And would everybody choose a turbo? So what I want to do is we can go over all the different benefits of each one of those, and we can kind of figure out what we would want. So on starting with the Jackson Racing Supercharger, the thing that I like about the Roots blower is that I like immediate boost response. It's one of the things I didn't like about having the Vortec on there, and I had the Vortec on a B series motor for a long time. I was originally doing land speed stuff with the guys from Vortec and the guys from Progress, and we were running a Vortec on it. We took it out and made a number of runs with that kind of thing. And the thing that I didn't like about the Vortec, and we'll get into talking about that when we talk about that one, but it has a rising boost curve. But the thing I like about the positive displacement blower is that as soon as you open the throttle, basically that thing produces boost. So on a small displacement Honda motor, a little B16 especially, one of the things that it doesn't have is torque, even though it has VTEC. So it has a mild cam profile, which helps torque production and helps have a nice broad, like on a VTEC motor. If you ever looked at the dyno results of one, it has a fairly flat torque curve, which is why it can carry power out so far, because it has two different cam profiles. So you have a nice flat torque curve, and the VTEC helps with that. But even still, it's a 1.6 liter motor. It's not going to make a ton of torque anyway. So having more torque, especially more torque down low, is really beneficial for those motors. And having a positive displacement blower definitely can do that. The problems, though, with the Jackson Racing Supercharger on that application, they were twofold. One, there was no intercooler on it. So you're a little bit limited that way. We didn't, back then when we were testing this, we didn't run these things on E85, which that combination, a Roots blower with no intercooler, definitely would have been a candidate for E85, would have helped a lot. But because I also ran one of those Jackson Racing Superchargers, I ran one on my Focus. I also ran one on my single cam VTEC motor, and we actually ran water injection, an ERL water injection, but not water meth, and I should have. But E85 again would have been better because no intercooler, and that's why we put that on, because we were turning the boost up fairly high on that single cam one. We were running like 13 or 14 pounds, and it needed a colder charger because we were running it for top speed, and so we were in the throttle for a long time under boost, and getting everything right to do that was very important to have charge cooling. So that's one of the things I didn't like about the B series Jackson Racing Supercharger, the Root style, because they have fairly, if you're going to turn the boost up, they have fairly high charge temperatures. The other thing is it's no intercooler. The other thing that was maybe a function of packaging on that more than anything is that the intake manifold that they designed to allow them to package the Root supercharger on that B series motor in the chassis that they did it on. They had kits for the Integras and for the Civics and stuff. The thing that having the packaging the way that it was necessitated a fairly short runner manifold. And this was the case with most of their kits. And the problem with having a short runner manifold, and a lot of Roots supercharger guys look at that like, well, we have immediate boost, so we don't really need runner length. Well, that's not true. Runner length helps regardless of whether you have immediate boost or not. So I know that you have good low speed power, and one of the tests that I did to demonstrate this, to demonstrate it to Oscar, who is just a great guy, and I've done a lot of stuff with him. But on the Focus motor, they had the same kind of thing, a big common plenum, very short runner manifold to mount the blower to. And so what I did is I just capped the top of it basically and put the stock throttle body on there, and then showed them what happened when you run that manifold naturally aspirated. So when you run that manifold, that short runner manifold naturally aspirated, it just loses power by a lot everywhere compared to the factory manifold, the factory really long runner manifold in the case of the Focus. And there is obviously there's fairly long runners in the Honda, less so than the Focus. But on the Focus, it was a dramatic difference because it had like 17 or 18 or 19 inch runner lengths. It was a lot. So not surprisingly, the very, very short runner, which was 2 or 3 inches or 4 inches, maybe, I think it was more like 2 or 3, lost power everywhere until the very top of the curve. So I'm like, well, the blower is making immediate boost, which is good, which we like, and it makes more torque than the NA motor with the factory intake, but not by a lot. And that's because it's starting way below that NA, and then you're adding boost to that combination, not to the one with long runners. So if you could add that boost to the long runner one, obviously better things would happen. You'd have more torque. And we see that when we run either a Vortec to it or a turbo, especially because a turbo adds a lot more boost than a centrifugal does in the lower engine speeds, especially if you size the turbo properly. So as much as I would like the idea of having the immediate boost response, and especially for a street car, having immediate boost response on a small displacement motor like that, there were limitations of that kit. So the next one is the one in the photo. and that's the Vortex Centrifugal supercharger. And you might think that one thing I liked about the, or a couple of things I liked about the Vortex is it had more ultimate power potential than the Eaton supercharger you used on the Jackson Racing kit. So the Vortex that they used, I think it was like a V5 or V9G or something like that. You could make more power with that blower than you could with the positive displacement blower on the V16. So there was power potential. You had to get past the jack shaft and other forms of belt slippage or stuff, which is something that you had to get past with the Jackson Racing blower as well. But you could get past all of that. I like that the Vortex also had an intercooler. It was an air-to-water deal, and that helps lower the charge temperature, helps make more power. I also like that you use the factory intake manifold. So unlike the Roots blower, you have the factory intake manifold. You have that P30 intake manifold, which is, as I found out from trying to do custom intake manifolds with the Honda, the P30 is a really good one, and it makes good power. So having your boost go through that is a really good way to start out with your combination. So you have intercooling, you have runner length. The one thing that I didn't like as well about the Vortex in that combination was, even though it seemed like a good match because it has a rising boost curve and you have a high RPM motor, and it just feels like a bigger VTEC motor, like you have another VTEC cam that came on because of the boost. So we could make, we made some fairly decent power. I think on a B16 we were getting up near 400 at the tire or something when we had things right with a good B16 with the cams in it and a ported head and stuff, and the blower turned up quite a bit. I remember making pulleys for this. We took a Mustang, a factory Mustang pulley, and adapted it to, we machined down the Honda damper and then bolted the Mustang pulley to it. And we eventually moved away from the jack shaft setup because the splines on the jack shaft stuff, we were worried about that for the power that we were producing and the blower that we wanted to use. I ended up making, I didn't, my friend Bernie ended up making a kit for us. We designed it to run down where the air conditioning normally is on a factory B series. So we mounted the blower down there using that mount, and then adapting to the blower to that, and then made so that we could have a very short belt, and then we could not have the jack shaft, and we didn't have belt slippage problems. We didn't have the jack shaft problem. We had a lot more blower, and then when we ran that on a 2-liter, we were up over 500 at the tire, and that worked out very well. We had a longer inlet discharge tube going to the intercooler, but all of that seemed to work out pretty well. So that was a good combination. But again, the same thing though. It was disappointing a little bit. And then, I mean, we had enough power to go the big top speeds for Bonneville, the kind of thing that we were doing, and what was the original design for me to put all this stuff together. But the thing is, if you get in the throttle at 2,500 RPM or 2,000 or wherever down low, you don't have very much boost. You have a lot of boost at 8,000, but at 2,000 or 3,000, you don't have very much. So there's not a big gain down low. So you don't get a whole bunch of extra torque down there, and the motor doesn't feel fast. If you've ever driven a VTEC motor feels really good when you're in VTEC. When you're going whoa, bah, and then it feels good. And that's kind of the Vortex kind of continues that theme, and charges hard on the big end. But when you're driving around town, it doesn't transform your B16 4-cylinder into a 3.5 liter V6 and certainly not a V8. Turbos can kind of do that. I remember the first time I rode in a turbocharged Civic, it was actually a CRX, and it was really impressive because the thing that it had that these motors had never had was torque. And so that's the next thing that we'll talk about is the next combination I ran on there was a single Turbonetics turbo kit, very straightforward, small T3, front mounted air-to-air intercooler. It was either 2 or 2¼ inch tubing going from the turbo to the intercooler. And you can see, well, I don't think I put the photo up, but it had like a Schedule 40 kind of exhaust manifold to mount the turbo on. It had the wastegate right on top of that. It's kind of typical of Honda stuff. Now, the wastegate was mounted right on top of the exhaust manifold. The turbo was mounted underneath. The inlet to the turbo was toward the passenger side, and then the exhaust went out and then went down underneath the car. And that combination actually worked very well. Now, it made the most. We ran all of these at like 7 pounds and then 10 pounds, and we could make, could run them higher than that. They would all make more boost than that. But on the turbo, it made the most power of any of them because it doesn't have the parasitic loss associated with driving either the Roots blower or the Vortec blower. It had a front-mounted intercooler, which we ran a fan in front of. And in fact, I think I also ran the turbo using the Vortec aftercooler deal. And we may have run a comparison between the air-to-air and that air-to-water. And I have to go back and look at that now and see if I still have the data on that, because that kind of would be interesting information. But we logged all of the boost curves, and I showed all that stuff. Matter of fact, I may have a video up on that already. I think that I do, where we did the comparison of all of these. But I like the turbo better because even though it didn't have the immediate boost response of the Roots blower, so it actually made less power way down low if you get in the throttle there. Most guys that drive Hondas, if you're wanting to go fast, you're not getting on the throttle at 2,000 RPM. If you do, you need to learn how to downshift, because especially on a small displacement VTEC motor, your power is going to be up in the top. So you want to be up in the RPM range if you're going to be racing it around. But if you did do that and you wanted to demonstrate that, which is something you can easily do on the chassis dyno, on the turbo, there's still not immediate boost response like there is with the Roots blower. So down low, the Roots blower is going to have a much better boost response. It's going to feel torquier and stuff. The thing is, the turbo quickly surpasses it though, because it makes more boost, a lot more than the Vortec through most of the curve. If they all make the same boost at the very top, because even the Roots blower had a rising boost curve. It didn't go up immediately to 10 pounds and carry 10 pounds across. The only one that did that was the turbo. And that's only because it was wastegated to do that. So as quickly as it could make 10 pounds, then it would carry 10 pounds all the way across. So when it had 10 pounds and the others were rising, it had a lot more power in that middle part of the curve. Not at 2,000, but certainly at 5,000 or 5,500. So it offered just it was just a better combination for the VTEC motor, turbo and a VTEC thing. I remember people telling me way back, oh, you can't run a VTEC, you can't run VTEC with a turbo. I'm like, why couldn't you do that? No, you only got to run it on the non-VTEC motors, on the LS and GS motors, 1.8 non-VTEC ones. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense at all. So for me, the choice would be a turbo, single small turbo on that to drive around if you had a street car and you wanted to have fun out on the street. It's a really good match for that VTEC motor. Obviously, the cool thing would be able to have the Roots blower with an intercooler and the long runner manifold and a turbo and another intercooler and have all of that. And so you could have, if for some reason you wanted to be roll racing from 2,000 RPM and you wanted immediate boost response. But then if you had the blower doing that, then you can have even more boost response with an even bigger turbo. And then so you wouldn't be sacrificing, okay, now instead of a 300 horsepower turbo, now I want a 400 or 500 horsepower turbo and then put the blower on it, which is the thing that we did with the 3800 V6. So on the V16, lots of guys will argue about which ones they like and which ones they go to, and which ones they're trying to make power with and stuff. But I think for me on those things, after driving turbo stuff on the street, it works really well. And there are other applications where I wouldn't pick the turbo if I had a daily driver truck or something I was towing with, I may be more apt to pick a positive displacement blower on that, especially if it had an intercooler on it, which is something you would definitely want. So let me know what you guys think. That's my 2 cents on the boosted small displacement stuff. And I think that some of those things become, even more critical on applications that don't have what that VTEC motor has. I wrote a book on B segment performance where we tested all these little cars like a the Honda Fit, the Toyota Yaris, the Scion XB and XD. I thought that there were like 5 or 6 different ones. And on those applications that don't have VTEC, essentially, you know, you'd have to try the different kinds of forced induction on those, because a lot of those motors are more geared toward torque production down low. And they're like, you know, 6,000 RPM motors or 6,500 RPM and not 8,500 RPM motors. So they have longer runners. They have, you know, more torque production in the low and mid range, and they're geared for a different thing. Most of those are geared toward fuel economy more than anything else, and not toward like the performance end of the spectrum, like the Civic Si. That's why Honda made different versions of the Civic. The Civic Si was the performance-oriented version, but they also had ones, the base models and the HX and the VX and the CX and all these other ones that did different things, and they configured the motors differently to do that. So adding the boost to that kind of motor would be a different deal. It's something I wish I did. I wish that I had added to my Civic VX. I always wanted to try a turbo on the VX to see if it could still be this 55 mile per gallon car, but then have another 50 or 60% of power, because, you know, having 50 or 60% of power is is always beneficial. All right, so let's see what kind of questions you guys got going on tonight. $60 pounds of boost on a 4G63 is where 4-cylinder heaven starts. That seems like a lot of boost. I've never run anything that high. $116 people watching a Hemi engine paint dry. Are there actually people over there watching just the paint dry? Yeah, I did like the noodles. I really did like, and I liked racing those cars too, because I got to race that Del Sol both in the Motorola Cup and in US Touring Car, and it sounds really good. And when I was racing, the goal was to never be out of VTEC, but sometimes on slow speed corners and stuff, it's hard to have the thing geared so that you're always in VTEC. The cool thing were we used to do, sometimes we do rolling starts and sometimes we do standing starts, and that was kind of a fun deal. I saw the ZZ632. That's 1,000 horsepower and pump gas. That's pretty cool. So Brett built the Eclipse. So Steve, you think that the older turbos don't make as much as the new stuff does now? So a B20, a 1,200 horsepower with a 72 millimeter turbo, that seems like a lot of power for a 72 millimeter. I've done some turbo D series stuff, but I think that the highest I've ever gone on a D series, because it was a stock motor basically, I think we ended up maybe putting a cam in it, but it was only 350 or something like that, or 370 or something at the tire. Chris, you have a compound on your 2.4 liter SRT4? Karen, do you have a complete 4G motor for sale? Richard, if you have a Boss 363 and a Fox bodies a daily, what would your choice of boost be? That motor by itself is pretty good. I actually like the Vortec on my mild 302. Well, I had a cam and trick flow heads and an intake manifold on the 302. I like the Vortec on that, but then after being in a, I got to drive a turbo Fox body, and it was night and day. So I think if it would package in there and fit well, I think a turbo would be good. Bill, if you're trying to do off-road, I don't know if you're doing any rock crawling or anything, then a roots blower might be better for that. A roots or a twin screw or something might be better for that. Yeah, I plan on Pure Essence. I plan on doing some J series stuff down the line. So you turboed your van for miles per gallon. That's an interesting combination. CRH Garage. I don't know what engine. I don't know what forklift engine you're talking about. Josh, if you put a 700 horsepower blower on a 700 horsepower motor, it's not going to do anything. What it will do is make power below the point where the peak is. So it might make more power on the front side of the curve, especially if it's a centrifugal. It's probably not going to do that. It'll make a little bit more because it has a rising boost curve. So it doesn't get to where it's flowing 700 horsepower worth of air until the very top. If you put that blower, a torque storm, on a motor that's making 700, you're going to make more than 700. In fact, I think that blower could make 800 on a really, really good NA motor, but most people don't do that. Most people put it on a motor that makes 400 horsepower or 300 horsepower, or maybe 500 horsepower. And when they do that, that's kind of where that thing wants to be. Dom, off topic, but have you ever tested the power difference between early 5-liter Explorer pinch down tubular exhaust manifolds compared to the later cast manifolds? I haven't tested specific Explorer stuff, but we've ran lots of the pinch down ones from Fox bodies compared to, say, shorty headers, which would be the best of what a tubular or any kind of factory style manifold would be. And there's not a big gain from shorty headers over the factory ones. What cam duration to run in a 1.6 Mini? Do you have lots of camshafts to choose from are available for the Mini? Can you install 5.3 liter cylinder heads on the 5.7 liter LS1 block? Yes, you can. All of the cathedral port heads will fit all of those motors. You can interchange any of the cathedral port heads on the 4.8, 5.3, 5.7, and 6.0. You just can't put the rec port heads on anything less than a 6-liter. Oh, precision has differences between the two curves. A 91 and an 89 shouldn't be a dramatic change, though. Stock D16, how much boost? Oh, a 428, a neon motor, okay. The Insight is nice, not particularly because it's light, but because it's really aerodynamic. It's kind of was the go-to. It should be the go-to car for land speed racing. But the problem is it runs in a specific class, but it's still really good because it's super aero. If the flow of an intake head exhaust manifold is pretty low, yet more boost will make more power, definitely. We ran 350 at the tire with stock D series rods. It was a D16. Do you have to change out rods if I switch cams? Are you talking about push rods or connecting rods? I'd like to see a small block Ford with 2V Cleveland heads. Intakes are available. Yeah, that would be interesting, only as a comparison to a stock Windsor head, because a 2V Cleveland head is not a great head. A 4V Cleveland head is a really good head, or it's a lot better. The exhaust actually doesn't flow very well on a 4V Cleveland head, but the 2V Cleveland head isn't head and shoulders better than like a 69 Windsor head or available GT40 head from the wrecking yard, but it might be better and it might make more power. Mine, can you turbo my Wi-Fi? That's what I need for some reason. My internet connection's not great. Booster pump works on a router. We put a booster pump on my son's Power Wheels Mustang. It worked really good. Honda got it right finally with the current K20 C1. Oh, their turbo Type R motor. I think that they were pretty right before that. I didn't give an Omni update yet because I don't have any right now. Evaporating liquid nitrous into an intercooler and expelling the exhaust into the intake stream. So you're just adding nitrous to the motor is what you're saying. And that works very well to add power. The Toyota 4Y. I'm not even familiar with that. Yep, we're live. Richard, did you notice that your cam DLS engines make a lot of tapping noises? No, I didn't. You need to make sure that you have the right push rod length. There's something loose in the valve train. 235, 240 also, I might check piston to valve clearance. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the K series or Volkswagen or other engines that have an integrated exhaust manifold. That's not for me. Evan, I've tested shorties a number of times and have yet to come up with any kind of significant gains. I don't know that we've run that test on a 400 horsepower 5-liter though. Javier, you have a Chevy Silverado with a 5.3. The best upgrade to make is a camshaft. Put a cam and springs in it is the first thing. Obviously, you'll have to tune it. Headers are good for that. Yeah, 7.4 is the standard push rod length. You have $4,000 going into a 351M. Seems like a lot. Darren, what you should think about and look at the other videos I have up is forget about the zero overlap thing. Camshafts with overlap are going to make more power, and they're going to do that NA, and they're going to do it boosted. So cam the motor so that it makes the most NA power out of boost, and then you'll have boost to make more power with. What's the most boost you've run through a 4-cylinder? I've only run about 30 pounds, I think, through was basically a B20, a big bore B18 for Bonneville, and we only did that on the engine dyno. I never ran it that high, anywhere near that high on the track. I have stock 906 heads for a 440. I'm on the fence about purchasing trick flow heads or Turbocharger and just stage 3 port and polish the heads. If you're going to add a blower, then I would just port and polish the stock heads and not spend the extra money on the aluminum heads, because you'll ultimately, the blower is going to dictate how much power you can make from that. Brian, no 2.2, 2.5 updates. I'm actually waiting to hear back from David Vizard to find out what the initial flow testing was on the head that I sent them, but I haven't seen anything. I did talk to the machine shop on the 2.2, so we are going to try to weld that one of the heads, the 2.2 head, the 84, and then we're going to put the freeze plugs in it. We're going to hone it. We're going to deck it just so that it's flat. Obviously, put new head gaskets in it. We're going to drill the block out for 11mm studs. And what else had to be done? New bearings, a new oil pump, just so that it's all good to go when we put it back on the engine dyno. And the head, once it's welded, it will obviously be resurfaced. We'll do a valve job on it. I'm sure the torque was over 200 foot-pounds at the wheel. I'll have to go back and look. I have the data. I have the dyno data here. I can take a look at it. What crankshaft to use in my 5.7 Heavy to increase RPM? The crankshaft's not going to do that. You have a crankshaft in there already that will run plenty of RPM. What you need to do is do the valve train to get the RPM. Yeah, and also Brian, I am looking for an 87 or an 86 2.2, a T2, because I want to put that in the 85 and get it certified in California. Hyundai engines. We did pitch those guys for a Bonneville thing. We did a, and I don't know if that was a Hyundai motor or not. We did the Suzuki Kazashi, and I don't know if that's also a Hyundai motor. I haven't seen anybody do 500 wheel horsepower on a D series on a stock bottom end. I haven't seen that. My 2-liter. Why did that thing change right when I was reading it? Let's see. Here we go. Brian Manhunter, thank you very much. My 2-liter Ecotec Pontiac Fiero ran in the 130 mile an hour club last month at Bonneville. It ran 142 at 60% throttle and 12 pounds of boost. Why were you running only 60% throttle? GLA 45, AMG 4-cylinder, 381 horsepower. Nice. A boosted Iron Duke, yep. So instead of 85 horsepower, we can make 160. The reason that they're using the integrated exhaust is for packaging and for converter light off. The final Roman, I just went over the Chrysler stuff. Yeah, the Hemi photos that you sent me, Hunter, were that was not good. Using nitrous as a refrigerant for the intercooler and expelling the gaseous nitrous out of the intercooler into the intake. How rare are manual gearboxes for Ford Windsor? There's lots of manual gearboxes for Fords. Frank, either the Racetech or the Autotech stuff will work for what you're doing. I'm sure that that's not going to be a 351M is not going to be a race motor, so that thing will work fine. Want to ride bikes? Are you talking about the trick flow 462 valve heads racing? And doesn't trick flow already have a CNC version of that? Yeah, the Racetech or Autotech pistons are good. They'll work good. Yes, the only T2s in the 86 would come from a GLA GLHS, and that's what I want to certify this 85 as a GLHS. An 87 would be easier, but an 86 will also work. Yeah, we know that I know all about the 86 T2. We know what it was and what it was, what it wasn't. That doesn't matter. The only thing I'm trying to do is put together a stock one and get it in the car and take it in. And I want to take it to a ref station, and I want to go through all of the stuff that it takes to get that upgrade in the non-intercooled 85. I want to do videos on it, and we want to get that certified as a GLHS swap, basically. A 186 stroker Iron Duke. I haven't done anything with an Iron Duke that I can remember. I don't even remember seeing any of those run at West Tech. Nachos. Why do long intake runners make such a big difference? And besides adding a turbo, what anything before the throttle body helps performance? Like maybe a smaller diameter tube to bring the airspeed up? No, the air intake before the throttle body is effectively Helmholtz resonance. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, but that's not going to, you can change the airspeed a little bit, but the runner length is going to make more of a difference in power. Long runners make more low speed and mid range, and even up to whatever RPM that is. Short runner stuff is for real high RPM deal, and it works whether you have boost or not. The air intake can add power through a couple of things. One, it gets cold air to your setup, and colder air is always better. Sometimes with some applications, you can change the power curve a little bit by changing the length of that tube or the diameter of that tube. It doesn't seem to be nearly as effective on like a typical LS V8 truck application. What would you add to improve that CC632? I don't know. I wish I had the money to afford it, so I would have to first do that. Rex, happy to help. I don't know anything. I haven't looked at the specs on the 632. I would imagine that there are, excuse me, there are much better cylinder heads that you could put on there. There are bigger camshafts that you could put on there, ported intake manifolds, and a tunnel ram would certainly make more power. I'm not interested in like I said, I'm not interested in getting the car smogged. I want to get it smogged properly, and I want to do it with the upgrade motor. So think about having an Omni GLH and doing a swap, and then taking that into a ref station and having it certified as a swap vehicle. Just like you could swap other things in other cars, this is essentially an engine swap GLHS. It's just 1 or 2 years different. And then it will go in, and they just make sure that it has all of the things that 86 or 87 T2 is supposed to have, and then it will be legal, and then I can have a motor that has an intercooler and the better throttle body position, it's not a draw through and all that. I'm not trying to get around anything. I'm not trying to do any of that. I'm trying to do it the right way. I just want to have I don't want to have a non-intercooled motor. I want to have an intercooled motor. And then when I have the intercooled motor, I want it to be legal. And then I can do all kinds of stuff on the chassis dyno, and then also do all the stuff that I'm going to do on the engine dyno. About to break in a flat tappet cam. We've broken in a bunch. Any flat tappet issues? Yeah, there seems to be flat tappet issues with, and I don't know if it's I think it's the lifter problems right now is what's going on. But way back when I was doing all the flat tappet stuff, when we did all the reproduction motors, we would do, I would overkill the thing, and we would put like high moly assembly lube on the cam lobes on the bottom of the lifter. We would put high zinc oil in it, break-in oil, and then we high zinc additive. Sometimes we would put low lift rockers on them for break-in, take out if it's a dual spring deal, take out the inner spring. Anything that you do to get the thing like seated in, be happy, and then you could kind of get after it. Q16 versus E85 on an NA motor, I really don't know. We don't see big power gains on NA motors from E85. Now, maybe we're not running it on a 15-to-1 motor like we should be. Q16 will add power, but I don't think the percentage was very high. On a boosted motor, E85 makes a lot more power than Q16 does. I thought that TrickFlow already had CNC ported versions of that head, but the other guy that I would talk to, since he's the guy that designed the head, is Brian Tooley. How do they know what year the engine is? Well, an 86 and an 87 T2 motor is completely different than the T1. It has an intercooler. It has everything about it is different. Also, the block has a casting number on it, and they would probably look at that. What turbo EFI carb set we personally do for a 351M? And again, it depends, Frank. It depends on what your power level is. It doesn't matter if it's a 351M or a 351 Cleveland or a Windsor or an LS or whatever it is. Start with a turbo, whatever size that is. It's going to be dictated by how much power you want to make. I would run a blow-through carburetor. I like the CSU stuff because we've run it a lot. Maybe other guys have run other combinations, but the CSU thing has always seemed to work well for us. And then, blow through that. If you want to do EFI, you could do EFI. I normally run Holly or Fast on there because I know how to tune that, or the Mega Squirt now. I'm not as comfortable with that because I haven't run as much stuff on the 4200, but I will be doing more of that. And I'm certain that one will do way more than I ever need to do. But anything that will give you the right air, fuel, and timing is going to be, good for what you're doing. Those are saying that they wouldn't waste their time on 351M. The 400M is one of my most popular videos, so obviously it's very popular. It's one of the funnest like Ford things that I did because nobody ever runs them in anything because everybody seems to like dislike them. But I look at it as a stroker Cleveland motor. Stock LS6 cam. A sloppy stage 2 is going to make a lot more power than an LS6 cam is. I've never messed with a Honda 1.8R. I think I still have the Super Duty catalog for the Iron Duke stuff. I think I still have that up in my catalog list up here. When are you going to get around to the RB or KA engine? Not a KA. I do have an RB, though. How would I go about adding a compound turbo to my 2014 VW Golf? Does anybody know what 4-cylinder they used in a 90s Pontiac Grand Am? Was that a Iron Duke? Don't know about when the J series is. I don't even have one of those yet. Would you build a Ford 5.4? I've done lots of testing with those. I haven't done any modular testing in quite a while though. CRH Garage, maybe I don't understand the question you're asking. Why does high efficiency, higher flow require lower boost than lower efficiency, lower flow to make the same power? Are you using boost and fuel to overcome the deficiency? Well, are you talking about an intercooler? Are you talking about the motor? If you're talking about a motor, the motor makes less power NA, that means it's less efficient. And then you add boost to that. If you have a 300 horsepower motor and you add 14.5 pounds, 1 atmosphere of boost, it could double that power output. If the motor's more efficient and it's 400 horsepower and you double that with another atmosphere of boost, now that turbocharged combination will make 800. So the boost is just multiplying what's there. So to get from your 600 horsepower motor to 800 horsepower that you made at a much lower boost level, you'd have to raise the boost a lot because your starting point is much, much lower. Starting point plus boost equals finishing point. Do smaller 1.6 turbos like more timing because of the slower piston speed? I haven't found that to be the case. You have to have the right ECU and harness and all of that for the swap. That's all part of the swap. I don't see too many 22Rs in the yard. The nice thing about this upgrade on the 2.2 is, I mean, we have to put the right ECU in there and the harness, and the harness difference is very, very minor going from an 85 to an 86, or even an 87. And all of the evap canisters and all that stuff is very, very similar. So it's actually, of all of the swaps that I was going to do, this one would be the easiest, assuming I can source all of these parts. Because I have to have, if I'm going to do a T2, I have to have, you know, the factory inlet tubes and discharge tubes and all that stuff, and air box and all that. So some because that stuff is, a lot of the stuff is no longer available, some of it's kind of hard to find. Also on the topic of mod motors, recommendations for a Navigator motor, take a look at all the of the testing that I did on the Navigator stuff. It's the same as everything else. I mean, you do ported heads and cams, and there's lots of modular cams available for them and boost and stuff. And then I did the intake manifold testing on the 5.4 stuff, so you can see what all those do. Complete with the nuts, bolts, and gaskets. Yeah, Frank, you pick the engine that you want to pick, man. Everybody picks their thing. Trying to size a turbo for a 2-liter 16-valve VW to push around 325, 350 rear wheel horsepower. A GT28, you probably could do that, but maybe, yeah, GT371 probably would be better. Rocket Surgeon, I have the intake manifold already. I have the intake manifold, throttle body. I have all that stuff because the 2.5 that I took out of that car had all the T2 stuff. The only thing that they had done is they had a really giant size front mount on it and different discharge tubes and all that stuff. So I need the factory air box and the discharge tube and just the factory stuff that hooks up to the factory intercooler for the T2 stuff. So if you have that stuff, send me an email and we'll get together. I'll buy that stuff from you. It's kind of like restoring a GLHS, except it's not. So I put my email down there, Rocket Surgeon, so you can see. The name of the machine shop that they use, it's near West Tech, is called Dugan's. What do you think about Hemi heads on an LS motor? Is the bore spacing even the same on those? And I wouldn't, there's no reason to try that to mix match that because both of those already have good heads for their respective motors. Overbuilt here. I haven't done any testing on a 3S GTE motor. Which one won't have EGR on it? My starting point was 101 to the crank. That was NA, I'm assuming, right? So I'm up to 16 pounds. Yeah, you should be at least at 200, as long as you have enough octane in it and intercooling that you have the timing that you need and the charge temperature that you need. Cappy, if you have a stock ECU, are you able to program that in your LE5? If you're just running the factory tune, I think that's a recipe for disaster. Oh, Snafu, but they're not by L&R is the name of the other shop, but they're not by West Tech. They're down in Santa Fe Springs. Yeah, Porsche 928 heads on the big block Chevy. Oh, Hemi style LS heads? Yeah, I don't even think I've seen those, like not in person. Final, hit me up. Let me know. Send me, I put my email down. So send me, Matt Mullins in the house. So send me some information. I do like the Suzuki Cappuccino name, though. That's kind of awesome. Garage, I don't think that going to coil unplugged is going to add anything. The only time that would be if you're getting misfire from your distributor or batch, and full sequential, you get better fuel mileage. I haven't seen, when I did the test on the LS stuff going from batch to full sequential, we really didn't pick up much power. We made big changes in the individual cylinder air fuel, which would make the thing a lot safer. But I thought we would get wholesale changes in power, and we didn't, because some of the cylinders were 14-to-1. And so once we brought them down to 12.8 or whatever, or 12.5, I thought that we would see power, but we didn't. But it did make me feel better that we were not as lean where problems would occur. It's not worthwhile putting a Porsche head on a big block Chevy because the Porsche head doesn't flow what an aftermarket big block Chevy head does. The same thing happened with the tuning on the Hemis when guys were adding boosts to the early Hemi stuff because nobody had tuning capabilities on the Hemi ECUs, and they would just run them. And I'm like, you can't do that. It doesn't work like that. oh, these Hemis are junk. These pistons are made of glass. They're broke. No, detonation. That's what killed it. Kevin, 500 horsepower is a 3076 or a GT3582, maybe. On a 2-liter, maybe the 76. Frank, in all of the 400Ms that I've run, which is one, we run two, I think, and the Clevelands, I've never done the oiling mods, but then I'm not out running them around or racing them. So we're running them on the dyno is actually fairly easy on stuff. I know that that's been a recommendation for a really long time, but like I said, when we ran them on the dyno, we didn't do that. The LS6 cam will definitely make more power than the LS1 cam. If you want to see how all of those cams do, take a look at the video that I have up where we ran all of the factory cams, and you can kind of see which cam you would like better. No Subaru motors. I'd have to see what GT28 it is. There's lots of different GT28s. Rocket Surgeon, I know that you're talking about some of the other high efficiency turbos, but the problem with those is, and they work very well. If you look at the Garrett stuff, a lot of the smaller size turbos can flow a ton, but they're really expensive too. An LS6 doesn't make the most power of any factory cathedral port cam. Oh, well, what's an LS9? Is an LS9 a cathedral port or is that a rec port? The LS9 makes the most power of all the factory cams. The LS9 and the LS7, but I wouldn't recommend either one of those because they're so soft down low. The G25 500, I'm going to put it on my Maserati 16-valve engine. That will be good. The Buick 455 is coming back. Cappy, as long as you can tune the factory ECU and change the air fuel and change the timing to where you want it to be, then that's all you need. You don't have to put an aftermarket ECU in there. As long as you can go in there and access that and put the size injectors that you want and make sure that it's 11.5 to 1 and that has whatever timing that motor wants. Oh, LS Hemi heads. Okay. I don't have a motor that would take advantage of what those Hammerhead performance deals. I don't build those kinds of motors. I still have the 500 Cadillac motor, Matt. There's not tricks to making bolts work. I usually put ARP stuff on boosted things. I did the dyno testing on Mike's motor. Let's see. I got a 2-piece T2, but the fuel roll is busted at the line. I heard a T1 log fuel roll we can use. Is that true? I don't know. I haven't looked at. I need to look at because I have I have 3 intake manifolds for these Dodge motors. I have the log style on the 84. I have I have a 1-piece and I have a 2-piece. So I could look at all those because I think that all of those have their fuel rails on them. So I could look at them when I'm down south. Yeah, Tom, a T25 on an SR20, you can make a lot of boost down low, but just it won't support that usually out at the top. What do you know about a GA16 Nissan? I don't think I know anything about those. Which is better for an LS swap, an Impala or Camaro? The Camaro will be lighter, and so it will be faster if that's what you're trying to do. Tuner said he's not able to add timing or boost due to the stock MAF sensor being between the turbo and the throttle body, but a wider frequency. So its position is not critical, but if you're topping out the mass air meter, there are ways to skew the mass air voltage, but I don't know about on exactly that application. So if you've topped out the meter, you have to put the electronics in a bigger housing and then go in and reprogram the ECU. Common ground, you can run 11-to-1 with boost as long as you have the timing right and you have an intercooler and you have good gas in it. Any recommendations for a Ford ZX3 turbo kit? Yeah, I read a bunch of those, and I have a book on Ford Focuses, and it covers all of that. But I don't know if anybody still makes those. F-Max had kits. You can actually just make one out of the stock exhaust manifold really easily. Just adapt a turbo to it right there. And I think when we did it, and I think guys have more stuff for them now. When we did it, I did a mass air meter that was calibrated for injectors. But now I'm sure that people could go in and tune the ECU. Boost testing on the most basic K series. I've not done any boost on an A3 K series. Only the K24 A2 stuff. When running stage injectors, it's better to have 2 different size. I honestly think that doesn't make any difference. I don't think given the fact, it depends on what your power level is. And this will be the last question because I got to get going. But even if you split the number in half and didn't use a real small one and a real big one, you use 2 80s, let's say, or 2 60s or whatever it is. The ones that you'd be using would be small enough for you to have good drivability anyway. If you're trying to use two 2000s, then maybe skew it. Get a 3000 set and get a 1000 set. But for what most guys would be doing, I don't think you'd have a problem with having them be the same. Okay, guys, I got to get going. Thank you all for showing up and spending Saturday night with me. It's Saturday, right? I think it is, right? Awesome. As always, got some videos going up, and I will see all of you guys tomorrow.